From a few of the people that brought you the utterly fantastic Legend of Korra, and the kind of just okay because it's really too generic, safe, and familiar to the broad strokes of shonen anime, Avatar: The Last Airbender, comes The Dragon Prince. In the years since the Avatar franchise came to a close, many of the talented folks responsible for its creation have gone on to work for a plethora of other titles, from Kickstarters like Blossom Detective Homes to the Netflix-backed Voltron revival. Once more, Netflix joins in, giving the newly founded studio Wonderstorm a chance at an entirely original IP. Headed up by Aaron Ahaz and Justin Richmond, who did much of the writing and episode direction for both Avatar and Korra, the question most folks have on the mind is, does The Dragon Prince live up to their previous work? I'm happy to report that such a mentality is an unhealthy one which shuns the evolution of creative talent. But if you're simply wondering, is The Dragon Prince good, then yes. Yes, it is indeed quite good. Before I go praising the world building, characters, humor, background art, themes, or any of that good stuff, let's address the one glaring issue. If you've seen any promotional material or clips floating around the internet, then you know the animation is deeply inconsistent. Where much of the background detail is handled in 2D, the characters and some of the other aspects of the set dressing are in 3D. One instance in episode 4 has Rayla fluidly jumping around some dark rafters, and the next has the cast falling victim to low frame rates and sporadically looking flat. Callum in particular falls victim to that latter issue. Though at the same time, the humor wouldn't land as well as it does if not for the facial animation and body language. We can only speculate the cause. I'd like to think it's not a lack of skill, but rather budgetary or time constraints mixed with any number of hurdles a team faces in the development of an animated series. The type of thing that with a successful first season, Netflix would happily grant Wonderstorm a chance to sort it out. In an interview with The Verge, Ahaz has called the criticism valid, and he hoped that if Netflix were interested to renew the show, then they'd work towards improvements. Thankfully, a second season has since been confirmed for 2019. Overall, the 3D melds with the 2D rather well. There's a clear through line to their art style between the two, avoiding the common problem where 3D animation on top of 2D feels like it's taking place in another world. Anime fans know exactly what I'm talking about. Good 3D animation is clearly possible for shows or studios not named Pixar or DreamWorks. Last year in my top anime of 2017 countdown, a fair few entries were entirely or significantly handled in 3D. Obvious standouts like Land of the Lustrous, or instances like ID0, Blame, Kimono Friends, and the creatures from Made in Abyss further prove that point. So if the anime industry can sort it out, I have faith in Wonderstorm. The great illusion of childhood is that adults have all the freedom, but the truth is the opposite. A child is freer than a king. It's this line that is most telling of the intent of Dragon Prince. Sure, The Last Airbender and Korra have children at their centers, but here the notion of childhood is a key point thematically. Most of the villains are adults. Even adults like Harrow, who are the best prior generations had to offer, are mired by the world they live in. Harrow regrets the years of using dark magic to his advantage, realizing that using such a power, even if to well-intentioned ends, means that those intentions are ultimately corrupted. But it's these deeply human characters who make it all so compelling. Despite the show's intended audience including children, the cast isn't simple. There's value to having kids consume media that reflects our world with as much nuance as optimism. The Dragon Prince is indeed deeply optimistic. So often the adults are tied down by the past. Runan, the leader of the Shadow Elf Assassins, is obsessed with the bad blood between humans and his kin. He doesn't care when Rayla steps forward to defend the human princes, Callum and Ezrin, as they in turn protect the dragon egg. This is the best chance at peace either of these races have seen in years, and Runan stands in the way of progress offered by these children. Children unburdened by the sins of their forefathers. At the same time, the adults aren't cartoonish villains. We get very intimate moments even with Harrow and Viren. In episode 1, Viren barges into Harrow's chambers despite the guards' dismay. It's a level of familiarity met with comic reception from Harrow that only happens between old friends. People capable of love and respect for one another. Viren reacts in such a way that conveys while these two are friends, he still deeply respects Harrow's position as a king, speaking to Harrow with a formal tone. Think Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark from Game of Thrones. Harrow's early conversation with Callum is also a high point that shows great vulnerability in regards to the Elder Caste. Callum's nature as a stepson has been a source of discomfort. They clearly want to talk father to son, but that's never been so easy. Until now, as Harrow's choices as king are to be met with bloodshed. To which Callum pleads for Harrow to find some other way to make peace. That Harrow, or any human, doesn't want to die, and nor do the elves, so why not agree to just not kill each other? To which Harrow responds that there is a great deal of history between men and elves, filled with injustices and wrongdoings, some of which he is responsible for. He delivers all this with great sorrow, knowing that the inability to forgive the past is to be held captive by it, and subsequently repeat it. He is saddened by his culpability and the likely not so distant future where he will not be able to guide his children into avoiding the same mistakes he made. Serving as a mirror to this is the relationship between Viren and his children Claudia and Soren. Both kids seem like good people outside of their father's influence. Soren can be a bit of a dude bro jock, but that's about it. He picks on Callum, but he also attempts to help him woo Claudia. Otherwise, he's an honorable knight whose loyalty to king and country is only outdone by his love for his family. Meanwhile, Claudia is easygoing and kind, but unfortunately blinded from the vile nature of dark magic because as her father's student, she's never not known it to be perfectly acceptable. As their father slips deeper into darkness though, so do they. Turning our attention to the three heroes, Callum, Ezrin, and Rayla, their relationship is certainly not perfect. Undoubtedly, they represent the progressive, youth-focused slant, but they don't always get along. Callum, who might be the closest thing this show has to a traditional hero, like Aang, is more often the source of tension in the group. He's blind to how his entitlement as royalty has affected him, forcing everyone to go along with little concern for outside opinion. Though force isn't quite the right word, it's more of a well-intentioned cluelessness. Rayla is victimized by this when Callum attempts to help the group escape the human army by pretending Rayla's holding them captive, throwing out racial stereotypes, then nearly getting her killed to boot. Even when he apologizes and says, "That's not what I meant to happen," that doesn't really cut it because, as Rayla points out, Callum's intentions matter little when it all goes so wrong. It's smaller stuff too, such as tossing the electrified orb at Rayla, forcing her to take the boat despite her clear fear, or continuing a conversation when Rayla explicitly wants to stop. The same happens between Callum and Ezrin in the finale.
Can you believe this?
Why would he lie?
Because he's a kid? Because it's fun? Because he's afraid to go up the mountain?
I'm not afraid.
Come on, Ez. Tell the truth. This is ridiculous. See, this is why you can't make friends.
Callum, back off.
We're moving on. We need to get to the rim.
Personally, my favorite character is Rayla. Her constant and superb dry wit and lack of confidence is something I can relate to. Where Callum is a takedown of a traditional hero, Rayla reflects everyday people who are desperately trying to do the right thing in a world that is so very wrong. Having been raised in a culture where she was taught to suppress individual emotion and carry out a violent justice as those in power, such as Runan, see fit. It's also nice to see that, so far, there's no budding romantic relationship between her and Callum. Something always felt a little off, or at best generic, about how Aang and Katara became a couple, and I think that was kind of realized in The Legend of Korra, as we saw with the ending. So my hope here is that the two can just be friends, and that's enough.
But in terms of diversity and representation, I don't like to talk about diversity. I feel like it sounds like an added extra. That's not what it's about for me, it's about representation. And representation is absolutely fundamental in terms of what we expect from our culture and from our politics.
It would be silly to ignore the fact that the cast of The Dragon Prince has lots of representation. King Harrow is black. Rayla is a female lead whose role is equal to the male lead, Callum. General Amaya is deaf. Across the board, the creator's intent is obvious. If you're worried about tokenization that cheapens their inclusion, that's not really an issue here. It all serves to further support the notion of a progressive mentality for a better future. I can't speak to the value of an eclectic cast on a personal level, but I fail to see any issue with marginalized folks being normalized. It's never brought up that Harrow is a black man as well as a leader of a country because it might just not be a thing in that world, just like it shouldn't be a thing in ours. No one is weird about Amaya being deaf, they just treat her the same way as anyone else. These days, I don't get to watch as much Western television as I'd like, so when I do, the time I invest feels particularly valuable. The second it's being wasted, it's 10 times as frustrating than when I watch one of the 25 new anime of any given season, and half of them turn out to be the same terrible garbage as we're so familiar with. So Wonderstorm, thanks for not wasting my time with the Dragon Prince. One of my favorite activities after watching a show, reading a manga, playing a game is to look up the names most responsible for their creation. Then I dive into previous works and optimistically look towards their future endeavors. And you know, that's all rather fitting when talking about a show like the Dragon Prince.
Oh no! Our boat seems to be drifting away. It slipped just out my reach. What will we do now?
If you would like to see me keep talking about good shows that are definitely anime, then be sure to donate to my Patreon. It's the best way to ensure these videos keep on coming.